Jim Evans, a seasoned aerospace engineer with a military background, stood in the dimly lit command room of Earth's United Defense Council. The weight of the impending decision pressed on everyone present as world leaders gathered around, their faces etched with fear and tension. Flickering on the main screen was the holographic projection of the Galactic Council's envoy. His alien face was stern and unyielding, his voice cold as he issued an ultimatum. Earth must surrender within 72 hours or face complete annihilation. The silence that followed was deafening. Words hung in the air like a death sentence, sending waves of disbelief through the room. Jim clenched his fists, the memory of his father's sacrifice during the earlier conflict with the Council flashing through his mind. His father had died defending Earth from the Council's first invasion attempt, and now it seemed the time had come for Jim to step into his father's shoes. As murmurs of fear and panic began to rise among the leaders, General Marcus Lee cut through the noise with a commanding voice. "We need solutions, not fear. Jim, you've been working on something with Dr. Evelyn Carter. Now is the time to share it." Jim took a breath, stepping forward. "We've reverse-engineered some of the alien technology we've recovered. It's risky, but it might just give us the edge we need." He turned to Evelyn, his closest confidant and a brilliant scientist. She nodded, taking over. "We've developed a missile system that integrates their technology with ours. If we can launch a surprise attack on their fleet, we could disable their primary weapon systems," Evelyn explained. The room was silent, all eyes on General Lee as he absorbed the information. Skepticism clouded his features. "And if it fails?" Jim met his gaze, unwavering. "Then we're no worse off than we are now. But if it works, it could save us all." After a tense pause, General Lee gave a single, sharp nod. "Proceed. But understand this, Evans, the fate of Earth rests on this." With that, the council members dispersed, leaving Jim and Evelyn to finalize the plan. Together, they worked through the night in their lab, fine-tuning the missile system. The pressure was immense, but they both knew the stakes. This wasn't just about survival. It was about defending the future of humanity. The sun had barely risen when Jim and Evelyn arrived at the command center, where General Lee was coordinating Earth's defense strategy. The atmosphere was tense, every second ticking down toward the Galactic Council's deadline. "We've completed the final checks," Jim reported, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "The missile system is ready. We'll be able to target their primary fleet as soon as they enter our atmosphere." General Lee nodded, his expression grave. "Good. We'll need every advantage we can get." He turned to address the room. "Remember, this is our last stand. We fight not just for our lives, but for the future of our species." As the final minutes ticked away, Earth's defenses were placed on high alert. Across the globe, soldiers prepared for battle, families said their goodbyes, and every able-bodied person readied themselves for the fight of their lives. In the command center, Jim stood at the helm, ready to execute the plan that could save them all. The Galactic Council's message had been clear: surrender or die. But Jim and his team were determined to add a third option to that ultimatum: fight back and survive. The countdown reached 0, and the command center erupted into action. Tactical displays illuminated the room, showing the trajectories of the incoming Galactic Council fleet. Their ships, vast and imposing, glided toward Earth like harbingers of doom. The air was thick with anticipation, and all eyes were glued to the screens as Jim Evans gave the order to launch the missiles. "Launch sequence initiated," Evelyn Carter announced, her fingers flying over the controls. Each missile became a symbol of Earth's defiance, carrying the hopes and fears of billions. As they shot into space, a collective breath was held in the command center. Jim watched intently, his heart pounding. The missiles soared through the atmosphere, breaking the silence of space with their speed. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Would they reach their targets in time? Would they be able to turn the tide of this looming catastrophe? Impact in 3, 2, 1. Evelyn counted down, her voice steady. The room erupted in cheers as the screens displayed the missiles successfully hitting their marks, creating brilliant bursts of light against the dark canvas of space. But the celebration was short-lived. General Lee's voice cut through the jubilation. Stay focused. We need to assess the damage and prepare for their retaliation. As the explosions faded, the display shifted to show the Galactic Council's fleet. Some ships were indeed disabled, but others were regrouping, their systems still operational. Jim's heart sank. This was only the beginning. Evelyn's expression was grim. We've disabled some of their weapon systems, but they're still able to fight back. We need to prepare for their counterattack. General, how are our ground forces holding up? Jim asked, urgency creeping into his voice. Engaged, General Lee replied, his brow furrowed with concern. Our defenses are holding for now, but we've lost communication with several units. We need to establish contact and coordinate our efforts. Just then, an alarm blared through the command center, signaling an incoming transmission. The holographic display lit up, showing Zorak's image once more. People of Earth, he proclaimed, his voice dripping with disdain, your efforts are in vain. You have provoked the Galactic Council, and you will face the consequences. The room fell silent again. Jim's fists clenched as Zorak continued, you were given a chance to surrender. Now you will witness the might of our fleet. Prepare for annihilation. As the transmission ended, Jim turned to his team. Determination etched across his face. We can't back down now. We have to strike again before they regroup. Evelyn, can we modify the missile system for another launch? Evelyn nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. We can adapt the targeting algorithms to focus on their remaining ships. It'll take time, but we can do it. General, we need to act fast, Jim urged. We can't let them get the upper hand. Agreed, General Lee replied. Let's mobilize our forces and prepare for the next assault. We need to maintain the element of surprise. The command center buzzed with activity as everyone sprang into action. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly, reprogramming the missile systems while soldiers received orders to prepare for the ground defense. The atmosphere was electric with urgency, each moment stretching into eternity. As they worked, Jim couldn't shake the memory of the hidden message they had discovered in the alien technology. A faction within the Galactic Council opposed the war. If they could reach these potential allies, it might change the tide of the battle. He glanced at Evelyn, who seemed lost in thought. Evelyn, he said, breaking her reverie, do you think we can trust the information we found? If there are allies within the Council, we need to find a way to contact them. She frowned, her brow furrowing with concern. It's a risk. We have to be cautious. It could be a trap. But if there's a chance for support, we can't ignore it. Jim nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. Let's run a simultaneous analysis on potential communication channels while we prepare for the next launch. If we can reach them, it could turn this fight in our favor. The tension in the room was palpable as they worked diligently, each person fully aware of what was at stake. The fate of humanity hung in the balance, and they were determined to fight for their survival. Hours passed, and the team continued refining their plans. The launch countdown began again, but just as they were about to finalize everything, another alarm blared. Jim's heart sank as he turned to the screens displaying the Galactic Council fleet. General, incoming ships, a technician shouted. They're engaging with our ground forces. Prepare our defenses. General Lee commanded, his voice firm. "We can't afford to lose our ground teams." Jim's mind raced. They needed to act quickly. "Evelyn, can we divert some of the missiles to support our ground troops?" Evelyn nodded vigorously. "I can reconfigure the targeting system to engage the ships attacking our defenses. We have to protect our people." "Do it," Jim shouted, adrenaline coursing through him. The command center buzzed with energy as the team rallied, the focus shifting to the defense of Earth. The screen showed chaotic scenes of battle as alien ships descended upon their ground forces. Jim felt the urgency of the moment, pushing him to act decisively. As the countdown to launch resumed, Jim felt a surge of determination. They were fighting not just for survival, but for the legacy of humanity. In that moment, he knew they would not be crushed so easily. Earth would rise up against the Galactic Council, and they would fight back with everything they had. With the targeting systems reconfigured and the missiles locked onto their new targets, Jim gave the order once again. Launch. The missiles shot into space, aiming straight for the enemy ships threatening their forces. As they soared, Jim felt a mix of hope and fear. Would this strike turn the tide in their favor, or would it only invite more wrath from the Council? The explosions lit up the sky as the missiles found their marks. Jim watched intently, his heart pounding. They had hit several enemy ships, and the chaos that ensued brought a wave of relief. "General, we've gained some ground," Evelyn shouted, her voice filled with excitement. "Our ground forces are responding. They're pushing back." For the first time in what felt like ages, a glimmer of hope flickered within the command center. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the future of their world. Jim and his team had found their strength in the face of despair, and with each victory, their resolve only grew stronger. But just as they began to celebrate, Zorak's image flickered back onto the screen. His voice echoed through the command center, a mix of fury and disbelief. "You think this changes anything? You will pay dearly for this defiance." The air grew tense again, but Jim refused to back down. He would not allow fear to control their fate. "Prepare for what's next," he instructed, determination firm in his voice. "We're just getting started." As the echoes of Zorak's threats faded, the team felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jim Evans, Dr. Evelyn Carter, and General Marcus Lee stood united, their focus now sharper than ever. They were no longer simply reacting. They were strategizing, planning their next moves in a game that would determine the fate of Earth. "Let's assess the situation," General Lee said, gathering the team around the central console. Tactical displays filled the room, showing the battlefield dynamics as their ground forces battled the Galactic Council. "What do we know about their remaining fleet?" Evelyn, her fingers dancing across the touchscreen, brought up detailed schematics of the enemy ships. "From our previous scans, they still have several capital ships in operation. They're regrouping and will likely retaliate soon." "Then we need to disrupt their formation," Jim suggested. "If we can create confusion among their ranks, it might give our forces the upper hand." General Lee nodded, impressed by Jim's insight. "We can use the remaining missiles for a diversion. It will split their attention and create openings for our ground troops to exploit." "Agreed," Evelyn replied, already inputting the new launch coordinates. "But we need to ensure the targeting systems are precise. One mistake could be disastrous." As they worked, Jim felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. The decisions they were making could save lives, or they could lead to catastrophic failure. He thought again of his father and the sacrifices made for Earth. He couldn't let fear dictate their actions. They had to be bold. "Let's launch the diversion," Jim said, his voice resolute. "We'll aim for their central command ship first. If we can take that out, it could disorient the rest of the fleet." Evelyn confirmed the coordinates. Target locked. Ready to launch on your command. Do it, Jim commanded. The room erupted into action as the missiles launched once more, their paths lighting up the tactical displays. This time, they were aimed directly at the heart of the enemy fleet. The team held their breath as the missiles soared through space, hoping for another successful strike. As they approached the target, Jim felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Would they succeed? Would this attack make a difference? The missiles detonated with brilliant flashes, hitting the central command ship. The explosion sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council's formation. Yes, Evelyn cheered, pumping her fist in the air. Direct hit. They're disoriented. The command center erupted in cheers, but General Lee quickly called for order. Stay focused. We need to support our ground forces while they capitalize on this confusion. Jim watched the displays, noticing the shift in enemy movements. The Galactic Council's ships were scattered, trying to regain control amidst the chaos. Now's our chance, he said. We need to coordinate with our ground forces to launch a full assault. General Lee began relaying orders to the ground commanders, while Jim and Evelyn monitored the tactical displays. They were on the brink of something monumental, but the outcome was still uncertain. As their ground forces pushed forward, Jim felt a surge of pride for his fellow humans. They were fighting valiantly, their determination shining through the darkness of despair. But just as they began to celebrate their progress, another alert blared through the command center. Enemy reinforcements detected. A technician shouted, "A new fleet is entering our atmosphere." Jim's heart sank. Can we identify them? Evelyn quickly analyzed the incoming ships. It looks like the Council has called for backup. This could be their last desperate attempt to crush us. General Lee's expression hardened. We need to prepare our defenses immediately. If they overwhelm us now, we could lose everything we've fought for. Jim, what do we do? Evelyn asked, urgency in her voice. Jim's mind raced. They had to hold their ground and outsmart the Council. We can't rely solely on missiles anymore. We need to bring our forces together and fight back with everything we have. General Lee nodded, recognizing the gravity of the situation. Let's mobilize our ground forces and prepare for hand-to-hand combat. We'll need to make every shot count. The command center hummed with activity as they readied their troops for the incoming onslaught. Jim felt the adrenaline surge through him. This was it. This would be the defining moment for humanity. As the enemy fleet descended, Jim turned to Evelyn. We can do this. We're not alone in this fight. Evelyn nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. Together, we'll show them what Earth is made of. The battle began in earnest as the enemy ships flooded into Earth's atmosphere, their ominous silhouettes casting shadows over the ground. Jim and Evelyn stood at the command center, watching the tactical displays as their forces prepared for the worst. Ground forces are in position, General Lee announced, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding outside. We'll need to hold our ground and protect our key locations. Jim felt the weight of the moment. We must make every shot count. If we can hold them off long enough, we might find a way to turn this fight in our favor. As the first enemy ships began their assault, beams of energy sliced through the air, hitting their defenses. The ground shook with the force of explosions, and the command center was alive with the sounds of urgency and determination. Redirect our artillery to the west flank, Jim shouted, pointing at the tactical display. We need to provide cover for our troops. Evelyn worked alongside him, relaying commands to the ground forces. We've got to keep our lines of communication open. If we lose contact, we could be overwhelmed. The battle raged on, the skies filled with fiery explosions, and the cries of brave soldiers fighting for their home. Jim felt a sense of pride swell within him as he watched his fellow humans stand their ground against an overwhelming enemy. They were not backing down. They were fighting with every ounce of strength they had. As the battle continued, Jim received a message from one of the ground commanders. "We're facing heavy resistance at Sector 7. We need support immediately." "Evelyn, can we reroute some of our missile systems to provide air support?" Jim asked, urgency in his voice. "Already on it," she replied, working quickly to adjust the targeting systems. "I'll get them locked onto the incoming ships." The sound of explosions grew louder as the enemy forces pushed forward, their numbers threatening to overwhelm Earth's defenses. Jim felt a surge of desperation. We can't let them breach our lines. We need to hold on just a little longer.
With a final push, the missiles launched, striking true against the enemy ships attacking Sector 7. Jim watched as the explosions erupted, providing the much-needed cover for their ground forces. But just as they began to gain momentum, a chilling message came through the command center. The Galactic Council is deploying their strongest weapon, a super battleship. It's heading straight for Earth. "Can we stop it?" General Lee asked, his face tense with concern. Jim turned to Evelyn, whose eyes were wide with realization. "If that battleship reaches our defenses, it could turn the tide against us. We need to act quickly." "We have to gather all available forces and prepare for an all-out assault," Jim replied, determination burning in his chest. "We can't let that ship reach our ground troops." As they scrambled to rally the forces, Jim felt the weight of their struggle pressing down on him. This was a moment of truth, and they had to fight with everything they had. They could not allow fear to take hold. They had to channel their anger and defiance into action. "Let's show them what Earth is capable of," Jim shouted, rallying everyone around him. "Together we can overcome this threat." With renewed strength, they coordinated their final assault on the super battleship. As the ground troops advanced, Jim and Evelyn watched the tactical displays, their hearts pounding with every movement. The battle reached a fever pitch, explosions lighting up the sky as Earth's forces charged forward. The super battleship loomed ahead, but Jim felt a spark of hope as their ground forces engaged. "Now!" Jim shouted as the last missiles were fired, targeting the battleship. As the missiles struck, the super battleship shuddered, its defenses wavering under the onslaught. Jim's heart raced as he watched the enemy vessel begin to falter. "Yes, we're making progress." Evelyn cheered, her voice filled with excitement. But just as victory seemed within reach, Zorak's image flickered onto the screen once more, his expression dark and menacing. "You may have delayed your fate, but it is still inevitable. The Galactic Council will not be defeated by mere." Jim felt anger swell within him. "We are not just mere humans. We are survivors. We will fight for our future." The determination in his voice resonated throughout the command center. With each moment, they felt their resolve strengthen. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for their future, a future they would carve out themselves. With one last push, Jim and Evelyn coordinated the final assault on the super battleship, pouring everything they had into that single moment. The ship shuddered as the last missile hit, the explosion sending shockwaves through the battlefield. As the smoke cleared, the super battleship crumbled, and cheers erupted throughout the command center. The Galactic Council's forces were in disarray, their resolve shattered. "Victory is within our grasp," General Lee exclaimed, his voice booming. "Let's finish this." Jim and Evelyn looked at each other, understanding what this moment meant. They had turned the tide against their oppressors, and together they had forged a path forward. As Earth's forces rallied, the Galactic Council retreated, their might diminished. The battle was far from over, but humanity had proven their strength and resilience. They would fight for their future, and they would never back down. With their victory on the horizon, Jim Evans knew one thing: they would rise from the ashes, united and stronger than ever. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, one where they would no longer be underestimated. They were Earth's defenders, and they would stand tall against any threat that dared to challenge them. Jim felt anger swell within him. We are not just mere humans. We are survivors. We will fight for our future. The determination in his voice resonated throughout the command center. With each moment, they felt their resolve strengthen. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for their future, a future they would carve out themselves. With one last push, Jim and Evelyn coordinated the final assault on the super battleship, pouring everything they had into that single moment. The ship shuddered as the last missile hit, the explosion sending shockwaves through the battlefield. As the smoke cleared, the super battleship crumbled, and cheers erupted throughout the command center. The Galactic Council's forces were in disarray, their resolve shattered. "Victory is within our grasp," General Lee exclaimed, his voice booming. "Let's finish this." Jim and Evelyn looked at each other, understanding what this moment meant. They had turned the tide against their oppressors, and together they had forged a path forward. As Earth's forces rallied, the Galactic Council retreated, their might diminished. The battle was far from over, but humanity had proven their strength and resilience. They would fight for their future, and they would never back down. With their victory on the horizon, Jim Evans knew one thing: they would rise from the ashes, united and stronger than ever. This was just the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, one where they would no longer be underestimated. They were Earth's defenders, and they would stand tall against any threat that dared to challenge them. The aftermath of the battle left a heavy silence in the command center. The screens flickered with reports of damage and casualties, but there was also a sense of triumph. Jim Evans, Dr. Evelyn Carter, and General Marcus Lee surveyed the tactical displays, noting the retreat of the Galactic Council's fleet. The tide had turned, but the war was far from over. "Status report," General Lee barked, his voice cutting through the tension. One of the technicians, a young woman named Mira, glanced up from her console. "We've successfully repelled the initial wave, but we've sustained significant damage to our ground defenses. Several units are unresponsive." Evelyn's heart sank. "We need to check on our soldiers and provide immediate support. They fought bravely today. We can't let them down." Jim nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders. "Let's get our medical teams dispatched. We need to ensure that every injured soldier receives care, and we must maintain communication with our ground forces to assess the situation." The team sprang into action, and Jim's mind raced. Despite their victory, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Galactic Council would regroup, and they would come back with even greater force. "Evelyn," Jim said, "I want to revisit the data we gathered on the Council's communications. If there's a way to exploit their weaknesses, we need to find it." "Already on it," she replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'll cross-reference the data we collected with their known tactics. There might be a pattern we can use to our advantage." As Evelyn worked, Jim turned to General Lee. "We need to prepare our defenses for their next move. Let's reinforce our perimeter and strengthen our ground positions." "Agreed," General Lee said. "We'll mobilize our remaining forces and establish a more strategic defense line. We can't afford to be caught off guard again." Hours passed, filled with activity and urgency. The command center buzzed with engineers, medics, and soldiers coordinating their efforts. Jim felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were building something stronger together. Finally, Evelyn looked up from her console, her eyes bright with excitement. "Jim, I think I found something. The Galactic Council has a communication network that relies heavily on a few key relay stations. If we can disable them, it could disrupt their command structure." Jim's heart raced. "That's it. If we can cut them off, it might give us the upper hand. Can we pinpoint their locations?" "Absolutely," Evelyn replied, pulling up a map of the surrounding space. "I've marked the relay stations. We can plan a covert operation to take them out." "Let's assemble a strike team," Jim said, adrenaline surging through him. We need our best operatives for this mission. If we can disrupt their communications, we could cripple their coordination. General Lee nodded, a look of admiration on his face. I'll assemble a team. This will require careful planning. We'll need to ensure that our forces can provide cover during the operation. As the team worked on the logistics, Jim's thoughts turned to the soldiers on the ground. They had sacrificed so much, and he knew they needed to be honored. Evelyn, can you prepare a message to our troops? They need to know that their efforts have made a difference. Evelyn's fingers paused, and she smiled. I'll draft something inspiring. They deserve to know we're proud of them. While Evelyn crafted the message, Jim stepped outside the command center, seeking a moment of reflection. The sky was filled with smoke and remnants of the battle, but it was also illuminated by the rising sun, a symbol of hope. As he stood there, he thought about his father and the lessons he had instilled in him about courage and resilience. This fight was about more than just survival. It was about the legacy they would leave for future generations. Moments later, he returned to the command center, just as Evelyn was finishing her message. Here it is, she said, reading aloud, to all our brave soldiers. Today, you fought not just for yourselves, but for every person on Earth. Your courage and sacrifice have turned the tide in our favor. We stand with you, united, and we will continue to fight together until victory is ours. Jim felt a swell of pride. That's perfect, Evelyn. Send it out to all our troops. As the message was broadcast, the atmosphere in the command center shifted. There was a palpable sense of camaraderie, a shared belief that they could overcome the darkness that lay ahead. Okay, let's focus on the relay stations, Jim said, refocusing the team. We'll need to strategize the approach and identify the best method to disable them without drawing attention. General Lee brought up a detailed plan. We'll split our strike team into 2 groups. One will create a diversion while the other disables the relay stations. If we can execute this flawlessly, it should give us enough time to infiltrate and destroy their systems. Evelyn nodded. And we can use our remaining drones for surveillance. They'll provide real-time updates on enemy movements and allow us to stay one step ahead. As they finalized the plan, Jim felt a sense of unity wash over him. They were working together, each person contributing their strengths to the mission. It was a reflection of humanity's resilience. Let's get to it, Jim said, determination in his voice. We're ready to show the Galactic Council that we're not just survivors, we're warriors. The strike team assembled, a blend of skilled soldiers, engineers, and strategists, all united by a common purpose. As they prepared for the mission, Jim felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was a crucial step in their fight for survival. Remember, General Lee addressed the team. Our goal is to disable the relay stations without engaging in direct confrontation unless necessary. We need to be swift and silent. Jim nodded, adrenaline coursing through him. We'll coordinate using our comms and the drones for real-time intel. If anything goes wrong, we'll fall back and regroup. The team set out under the cover of darkness, moving stealthily toward the designated relay station. Jim felt the weight of the moment as they approached their target. This was not just about disabling a communication network, it was about striking a blow against an oppressive regime. As they neared the relay station, Jim activated the drone. The small device whirred to life, its cameras scanning the area. The feed showed several guards patrolling the perimeter, their movements methodical. Looks like we've got eyes on the ground, Jim whispered, studying the screen. We'll need to wait for the right moment to make our move. Minutes felt like hours as they waited, but Jim's resolve remained steady. Finally, the opportunity presented itself. The guards shifted, leaving a small opening in their patrol pattern. Now, Jim commanded, leading the team forward. They moved swiftly and silently, slipping past the guards and entering the relay station. Once inside, the atmosphere changed. The sterile, metallic walls echoed with the sounds of machinery. Jim's heart raced as they navigated through the corridors, heading toward the central control room. Evelyn, how long will it take to disable the system? Jim asked, urgency in his voice. Just a few minutes, she replied, her fingers dancing over the console. I'll need to bypass their security protocols. Keep an eye out for any incoming patrols. As Evelyn worked, Jim and the rest of the team maintained watch. The tension in the air was thick, every sound amplified. Jim's mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if they were discovered, but he pushed those fears aside. They had come too far to turn back now. Almost there, Evelyn muttered, focused on the screen in front of her. Just a few more seconds. Suddenly, an alarm blared through the station, piercing the silence. Jim's heart dropped. Evelyn, what happened? Someone must have spotted us, she exclaimed, her fingers still flying over the keys. I'm almost done, but we need to hurry. Let's move, Jim shouted, rallying the team. They needed to get out before they were overwhelmed. As the alarm continued to blare, Jim led the charge out of the control room, their path illuminated by red emergency lights. They raced through the corridors, adrenaline fueling their escape. Evelyn, can you shut down the alarm? Jim asked as they ran. I'm trying, she called back, frustration evident in her voice. I'll disable it as soon as I can. They reached the main exit just as a group of guards rounded the corner. Get down, Jim yelled, diving to the side as shots rang out. The team returned fire, covering Evelyn as she worked to disable the alarm. Almost there, she shouted, her voice determined. With one final keystroke, the alarm fell silent. Jim felt a surge of relief as they pushed through the door and out into the night. Move! Move! He commanded, leading the team away from the station. They dashed through the shadows, hearts pounding as they evaded the guards. The moonlight illuminated their path as they sprinted toward the rendezvous point where their extraction team awaited. As they reached the designated location, the extraction ship hovered silently above. Get in, the pilot shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The team piled inside, and as the doors sealed shut, Jim felt a rush of victory. They had completed the mission and disrupted the Galactic Council's communication network. But they weren't out of danger yet. Status report, Jim called out, still breathless. Evelyn looked up from her console, a triumphant grin on her face. We've successfully disabled both relay stations. The Council is cut off from each other, and they won't be able to coordinate their forces. General Lee's voice boomed through the ship. Excellent work. Now we need to regroup and plan our next move. This is our chance to strike while they're vulnerable. As the ship soared through the night sky, Jim felt a renewed sense of hope. They had faced incredible odds and emerged stronger, more united than ever. But the battle was not yet won. The Galactic Council would retaliate, and they needed to be prepared. Evelyn, Jim said, turning to her, this victory means everything. We've shown them that we won't back down, that we are a force to be reckoned with. Evelyn nodded, her expression resolute. We're just getting started. We'll take the fight to them, and this time we'll finish it. As the extraction ship made its way back to the command center, Jim felt a fire igniting within him. They were no longer underdogs. They were warriors. They would fight for their home, their future, and they would stand together against the Galactic Council. Humanity was no longer underestimated. They were rising, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their resolve to reclaim their destiny.